In 1933, Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. Every American citizen was legally required to hand over their gold to the federal government. Not asked, required. You had until May 1st to comply or face a $10,000 fine and up to 10 years in prison. The government paid below market rates for what it took, then immediately revalued gold upward by 70%, transferring that wealth directly to itself. It happened in Australia, too. The Banking Act of 1959 gave the Australian government explicit legal power to seize gold from private citizens whenever the governor deemed it necessary to protect the currency. Cyprus, 2013, bank deposits above €100,000 were seized overnight to bail out the banking system. Account holders woke up to find a percentage of their savings simply gone. Argentina, 2001, the government froze all bank accounts. Citizens couldn't access their own money for months. Greece, 2015, capital controls prevented people from withdrawing more than €60 per day. Lebanon, 2019, banks froze accounts and citizens lost access to life savings overnight. The pattern is not ancient history. It is recent, documented, and repeating. And here's the thing that should keep you up at night. In every single case, the assets that got seized were the ones held inside the financial system. Bank deposits, brokerage accounts, pension funds, anything requiring an intermediary became a vulnerability. The government doesn't seize what it cannot reach. So today, we're talking about what it cannot reach. The first asset is the one that has the most complicated history with governments, which is exactly why understanding it properly matters so much. Physical gold and silver held in private possession, not in a bank vault, not in an ETF, not in a custodial account, in your direct physical control. Yes, governments have seized gold before. Yes, it could theoretically happen again. But here's the critical distinction that most people miss entirely. In 1933, the seizure worked because most gold was held inside the banking system, in verifiable, documented accounts. The government didn't go house to house searching mattresses. It administratively redirected gold held inside institutions it already controlled. Physical gold held privately, documented nowhere, known to no financial institution, is a fundamentally different situation. Modern gold confiscation faces obstacles that didn't exist in 1933. There is no gold standard to protect. The incentive structure has changed, and the practical enforcement of seizing privately held physical metal distributed among millions of individual holders is an administrative nightmare that no modern government has successfully executed. Silver is even more practical for this purpose. Currently around $30 per ounce versus gold at over $3,000, silver is accessible at any budget level and has the same physical, unconfiscatable characteristics when held privately. The Sprott Physical Silver Trust alone raised approximately $1 billion as silver surged nearly 100% in 2025, confirming that institutional investors are moving into physical precious metals for exactly these reasons. The rule: any precious metal held in an ETF or custodian account is as vulnerable as a bank deposit. The seizure-resistant version requires physical possession. The second asset is one that no government in history has ever successfully confiscated at scale, and the reason why is fascinating: skills, knowledge, and human capital. You cannot freeze a surgeon's ability to operate. You cannot confiscate a mechanic's understanding of engines. You cannot seize an electrician's knowledge of wiring or a software developer's ability to build systems. These assets live inside a human mind and exist entirely outside the reach of any administrative apparatus any government has ever built. In Weimar Germany during hyperinflation, doctors and tradespeople were among the most economically stable members of society because they could barter services directly when currency became worthless. During Argentina's 2001 crisis, professionals who could provide essential services maintained purchasing power through direct exchange, while those dependent on financial system assets watched their wealth evaporate. This isn't a passive investment, it's an active one. Every hour spent deepening genuinely valuable, irreplaceable skills is compounding an asset that is immune to executive orders, capital controls, bail-ins, and bank freezes. The person who can fix things, heal people, build systems, or grow food holds an asset that has survived every collapse in recorded history because human needs don't disappear when financial systems do. In 2026, the highest value skills in a collapse scenario combine digital portability with essential service provision. A medical professional who can work remotely via telehealth, bill in multiple currencies, and operate across jurisdictions holds arguably the most seizure-proof asset that exists. Halfway through, and here's the one that's genuinely changed the game since every previous collapse in history. Self-custodied Bitcoin, held in cold storage you control directly with no exchange intermediary. The precise and important distinction here mirrors the gold argument. Bitcoin held on an exchange is as vulnerable as a bank deposit. Exchanges can be frozen, regulated, forced to comply with government orders, or simply collapse as FTX demonstrated. That Bitcoin is not seizure-resistant. Bitcoin held in a hardware wallet with private keys that exist only in your possession and memory is a structurally different situation. There is no intermediary, there is no institution to compel, and there is no account to freeze. The asset is cryptographically controlled by whoever holds the private key, and short of physical coercion to reveal that key, no administrative mechanism exists to seize it. During the Turkish lira crisis, the Argentine peso collapse, and Lebanon's banking freeze, Bitcoin adoption surged in each country as citizens moved wealth into a form that could cross borders digitally when physical capital couldn't move at all. That's not speculation about what Bitcoin might do. That's documented behavior of real people in real collapse scenarios in recent history. The caveats are serious. Volatility is extreme, a 5% maximum allocation, cold storage only, never on exchanges, and the private key must be secured in a way that survives physical emergencies. But as a tail risk asset, specifically designed for the scenario where borders close and banks freeze, nothing in financial history has ever existed with these particular properties before. The fourth asset is one that governments struggle to seize, not because of any loophole, but because of a fundamental practical reality about how seizure works: productive land, specifically agricultural land in jurisdictions with strong property rights. Governments can impose new taxes on land, they can regulate how it's used. In extreme scenarios, they can attempt expropriation, though this is constitutionally and legally constrained in Australia, the US, and most developed nations to the point of requiring compensation. What they cannot easily do is make fertile land stop producing food, and what they cannot do is make the need for food disappear. During every collapse in history, agricultural land has retained and often increased its real value precisely because its productivity is tied to fundamental human need rather than financial system confidence. When currencies collapse, when banks freeze, when stock markets go to zero, food production continues. The land producing it continues to hold value. The practical version of this for most investors isn't buying a farm, it's understanding that agricultural REITs, direct rural land investment, or even a small productive property represent an asset class whose value is anchored to something that exists entirely outside the financial system's confidence game. You can't print more fertile topsoil. You can't create more arable land. And governments that have attempted mass agricultural land seizures historically have triggered famine, which is a powerful political disincentive against attempting it in the first place. The fifth asset is the most unconventional on this list, and it's one that wealthy families have used for centuries to protect assets across political regimes, wars, and currency collapses: jurisdictional diversification. specifically assets, residency rights, or citizenship held across multiple sovereign jurisdictions. A second passport or residency right in a different country is an asset that a single government cannot unilaterally seize because it was granted by a different sovereign authority. It cannot be frozen, it cannot be confiscated, it simply exists as a documented right under a different legal system. When capital controls are imposed in one country, having legal residency in another means you may have the right to move yourself and your economic activity to a jurisdiction not experiencing the crisis. Countries like Portugal, Malta, Paraguay, and several Caribbean nations offer residency or citizenship through legal investment programs. The costs range from $100,000 to several $100,000 depending on the program, putting this out of reach for most people as a primary strategy. But the principle scales down. Assets held in regulated foreign jurisdictions through legal structures, international brokerage accounts in stable countries, property ownership in different legal systems all represent fragmentation of your wealth across multiple sovereign authorities. A government can only administratively reach what exists within its own jurisdiction. What lives outside it requires either international cooperation or diplomatic negotiation to touch, both of which create friction and time that benefits the asset holder. The thread connecting every asset on this list is the same thing. They exist outside the administrative reach of any single intermediary or government. Physical precious metals in direct possession, human skills living inside a human mind, Bitcoin with private keys held in cold storage, productive land anchored to fundamental need, assets distributed across multiple sovereign jurisdictions. In every historical collapse, the people who lost everything had one thing in common. Every single asset they owned required a financial intermediary to access or a single government's goodwill to protect. Bank accounts required the bank, brokerage accounts required the broker, pension funds required the fund manager, gold ETFs required the custodian. The lesson isn't to live in a bunker or reject the financial system entirely. The lesson is that a portfolio entirely dependent on the financial system functioning normally has no defense against the scenario where it doesn't. History says that scenario is not a question of if, it's a question of when and where. You don't need to bet on collapse, you just need to make sure you're not entirely defenseless if it comes.